They called him Juggernaut, or simply Jug, but at first the nickname carried a tone of mockery. When the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt appeared in the skies of Europe, its appearance was an affront to everything known about fighter planes. It was a massive, heavy, and clumsy aircraft, a metallic exaggeration that, in the eyes of experienced Luftwaffe pilots, seemed more like a fat target than a real threat. The Germans' confidence, forged in years of aerial dominance with their agile and elegant Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, turned the Thunderbolt's arrival into a joke in the hangars. They laughed at that machine that seemed like an engineering mistake, a tractor with wings in a ballet of blades. However, that mocking confidence wouldn't last. What appeared to be an easy target hid a revolutionary secret, a mechanism capable of reversing the course of the war in the skies. Stay with me until the end to discover how this ridiculed plane became a machine that rewrote strategies, humiliated experts, and made veterans doubt everything they knew about aerial combat. The story begins with laughter, but ends with an uncomfortable silence in the corridors of the enemy high command. To feel the full impact of this transformation, every detail matters, from the philosophy of its design to the moment when the skies ceased to be German territory and became an arena of American predators, equipped with an advantage that no one there had even imagined. The initial contempt would be the Luftwaffe's first and greatest miscalculation, an error they would pay dearly for in metal, men, and finally in their unquestionable air superiority. The Europe of 1943 was an aerial chessboard dominated by a single color. The sky, which should have been a neutral battlefield, had become a natural extension of the German war machine. The Luftwaffe controlled operational altitudes like someone controlling train tracks, with precision, rhythm, and a confidence bordering on arrogance. Their fighters, refined by years of combat in Spain, Poland, and France, appeared and disappeared with an efficiency that terrified Allied bombers. Every confrontation followed a logical, almost predictable pattern based on speed, maneuverability, and the experience of pilots who considered themselves masters of aerial duels or dogfights. The war was fought in corridors of clouds where German fighters moved like predators in their natural habitat. In this scenario, the Thunderbolt, with its weight and size, seemed like a clumsy intruder. The Americans, newcomers to that deadly game, found themselves always a few steps behind, piloting a machine that seemed incapable of competing under the established rules. This imbalance was not just psychological, it was mathematical. The Germans had aces with hundreds of kills, refined tactics, and aircraft designed for the dance of death in tight turns. Meanwhile, American pilots, many still inexperienced, tried to adapt to a fighter that, although impressive on paper, seemed to lack the necessary agility. Initial reports confirmed the frustration. The P-47 was tough, a true flying tank, but slow to climb and difficult to maneuver, making it easy prey for a more agile enemy. A direct confrontation seemed like suicide, and the Germans knew it. But something was happening away from the pilot's eyes, a plan that would transform this supposed disadvantage into a decisive weapon. Amid a scenario dominated by heroic pilots and ego-inflated generals, a discreet figure observed the conflict with a different gaze. Alexander Kartelvi, a Georgian engineer with an restless mind, did not let himself be swayed by the fashions of aerial combat. While everyone discussed lightness, agility, and elegance, Kartelvi delved into numbers, material resistance, and above all, the limits of physics at high altitudes. For him, the answer was not to create an American copy of the Messerschmitt. Defeating the Luftwaffe required not competing in their game, but creating an entirely new board. His vision put him on a collision course with military consensus. He was about to deliver what many considered a conceptual mistake, a heavy fighter in a world that idolized lightness, a monster in a universe of felines. But Kartelvi's confidence did not come from arrogance, but from calculations that revealed something the Luftwaffe ignored. Their sovereignty ended at an invisible ceiling. There was a critical altitude, a territory of rarefied air and freezing temperatures, where their engines lost power drastically. Kartelvi understood this before any pilot. He didn't need to beat the enemy on their turf, he just needed to drag them into an environment where they couldn't breathe. From that realization, every rivet and every component of the P-47 was designed for a purpose: to dominate high altitudes. He didn't want a fighter to win turning contests. He wanted a weapons platform capable of escorting bombers where German interceptors could barely operate. He sought speed in dives, stability in extreme dives, and raw power when everyone else was suffocating. He was, without many knowing, building the predator of a hostile ecosystem that only existed in his calculations. The revolution was hidden in the guts of the metallic giant. It wasn't a new cannon or thicker armor, but a complex engineering system that redefined the laws of power at altitude: the General Electric turbo-supercharger. Alexander Kartvelli made the radical decision to design the entire plane around this component. The system was an industrial work of art. It captured the hot exhaust gases from the Pratt Whitney R-2800 double wasp engine, energy that would otherwise be wasted, and channeled them through a labyrinth of ducts that glowed bright red, running under the fuselage to the tail of the plane. There, those gases spun a turbine, the size of a small washing machine, at over 21,000 revolutions per minute. This turbine drove a compressor that sucked in the rarefied and cold air from high altitudes, compressed it violently, restoring the density of sea-level air, and sent it back to the engine's intake. In practice, the Thunderbolt's engine breathed high-density pressurized air at 30,000 feet, maintaining its maximum power where German engines, reliant on mechanical superchargers that stole power from the engine itself, began to fail. This solution, though ingenious, made the aircraft immense and heavy, explaining its barrel-like shape. What German pilots saw as fat and slowness was, in fact, the casing of a mechanical lung that ensured the P-47's superiority at the top of the sky. This piece, invisible to those looking from the outside, would become the heart of the turnaround in the air war, transforming the flying elephant into a deadly predator. With technical superiority guaranteed at altitude, the method was still missing. That's when tactical leaders like Colonel Hubert Zemke began rewriting the aerial combat manual. They realized that using the P-47 in a traditional horizontal duel was like using a construction hammer for delicate surgery: tactical suicide. The only way to extract the maximum potential from that colossal structure was to embrace its nature and convert it into a weapon of kinetic energy. Thus was born a brutally effective philosophy: the dive and zoom tactic, boom and zoom. The doctrine was simple: climb higher than the enemy, much higher, to the limit where the Thunderbolt operated comfortably and the Luftwaffe struggled to stay afloat. From there, pilots selected their targets, diving vertically in a devastating attack. The P-47's weight, previously a disadvantage in climbing, became a terrible weapon in descent, allowing the aircraft to accelerate to speeds near 500 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter in a dive. They became a nearly 7-ton projectile, falling from the sky like a hammer. As they approached the target, pilots unleashed a barrage from the 850 caliber machine guns, creating a wall of lead that disintegrated anything in its path. After the attack, instead of engaging in a turning fight, they used the immense energy accumulated in the dive to climb again, disappearing back into the heights before the enemy could even react. It wasn't a duel, it was an execution. This mindset transformed the European sky into a vertical hunting ground, where surprise and crushing speed were the deadly weapons. Executing vertical attacks was simple in theory, but in practice, it demanded an extreme physical and mental toll from the pilots. Every mission in the P-47 was a battle against the limits of the human body. The long, slow climb to the stratosphere was just the beginning. Up there, the freezing cold required heated suits, and the rarefied air made the oxygen system the thin line between life and death. The real test, however, began in the dive. The brutal acceleration, driven by gravity and the colossal weight of the aircraft, created a sensation of controlled freefall. The G-forces compressed the pilot's body against the seat, draining blood from the head and threatening blackout at G-lock at any second. Keeping the sights on a target while the plane vibrated violently under extreme aerodynamic pressures required almost superhuman concentration. It was, as many described, a dangerous dance between courage and calculation, where one extra second in the dive could mean the aircraft's disintegration or a fatal collision. The engine's roar turned into a shrill scream, and the fuselage seemed about to break apart. The logistics of these operations were equally unforgiving. Fuel consumption on climbs required rigorous planning. Communication was minimal and direct, as there was no time for hesitation. The return was no guarantee of relief. The cycle of extreme heat and dives and intense cold at altitudes caused brutal wear on both equipment and pilot. Every mission proved that the Thunderbolt was not an aircraft for just anyone. It demanded a specific pilot profile, someone with the physical endurance of an athlete and the coolness of a surgeon, willing to push themselves and their machine to the absolute limit day after day. At the heart of this relentless routine, leaders emerged whose authority came not from rank but from a calm presence amid the chaos. They were pilots and commanders who understood that the Thunderbolt was not just equipment but a temperamental partner, capable of saving lives or demanding sacrifices without warning. This quiet leadership manifested in actions, personally checking every detail of the aircraft before takeoff, practicing dives repeatedly until every vibration of the hull was familiar, or accepting the most dangerous missions to set an example. They became the anchor of their squadrons, not by imposition, but because, when the radio failed and the sky became a confusion of smoke and fire, it was they who maintained the clarity to reorganize formations, guide panicked pilots, or make the difficult decision to withdraw. Leadership there was not a title, it was a behavior forged by daily coexistence with extreme risk. This camaraderie created bonds that transcended hierarchy. Each squadron developed its own language, composed of gestures, rituals, and a mutual understanding that words could not capture. A touch on the plane's hull before climbing, a double check on a comrade's belts, a nod before initiating the dive. Everything gained deep meaning when the possibility of not returning was a constant presence. Leading a group under these conditions required more than tactics. It required the sensitivity to know when to push, when to support, and when to simply listen. The harshness of the P-47 also forced the men into a raw understanding of their own fragility, but this shared vulnerability became the source of their collective strength, a network of mutual trust that allowed ordinary men to face the extraordinary. The turnaround didn't happen in a single day, but there were moments so decisive that they seemed to condense the entire change into one scene. Suddenly, the sky seemed to have new rules, and they were all imposed by the Thunderbolt. German pilots, once absolute masters of medium altitudes, began to notice something deeply disturbing. Attacks no longer came from the front or flanks, but from a vertical blind spot, from heights their engines could barely reach. The initial reaction was surprise, followed by unease, and finally, real and paralyzing fear. The Luftwaffe's classic tactics, turning in circles, luring the enemy into maneuvering fights, became useless. The P-47 simply refused to play that game. It attacked with the force of a projectile and disappeared before any counterattack could be organized. Reports from German pilots began to describe situations bordering on the absurd. Aircraft emerging like shadows in freefall, unleashing bursts so dense they seemed to fill the sky with metal, then climbing at impossible angles, leaving only a trail of condensation. It was like fighting a ghost that attacked on an axis no one had trained to defend. This tactical shock began to generate a collapse in morale. Squadrons of veterans, once confident and aggressive, became hesitant, constantly looking up, waiting for the blow that could come at any moment. Luftwaffe doctors began documenting cases of Thunderbolt neurosis, an involuntary stress response in pilots who survived multiple encounters, with symptoms similar to the combat stress of soldiers in trenches. Air superiority, once a pillar of German strategy, began to crumble, not due to lack of skill, but before a force that redefined the battlefield itself. The Thunderbolt's impact quickly spilled over from the skies to the ground, shaping the Allied advance in Europe. With the Luftwaffe neutralized at high altitudes, the P-47 was freed for its second vocation, that of a devastating fighter bomber. Its legendary robustness, which allowed it to withstand damage that would destroy other fighters, and its capacity to carry a bomb and rocket load comparable to that of light bombers, transformed it into the perfect tool for ground attack. The characteristic sound of its engine became a harbinger of destruction for German ground forces and a signal of relief for Allied troops. Entire railroads were paralyzed, columns of tanks and trucks reduced to smoking hulks, and supply depots turned into craters before infantry troops even arrived on site. The statistics reveal the scale of this destruction: thousands of locomotives, tens of thousands of vehicles, and hundreds of tanks destroyed. This relentless interdiction campaign created a phenomenon that reports called anticipatory paralysis. German units halted movements and hid at the mere distant sound of an engine, fearing it was the start of another attack from nowhere. For Allied soldiers pinned down in combat, the P-47 was a mechanical guardian angel. Countless reports describe infantry units saved from annihilation by a squadron of jugs that appeared at the critical moment. The Thunderbolt didn't just clear the way. It systematically demolished the German army's ability to fight, move, and resupply, altering the logistical flow of the entire front and accelerating the collapse of the Third Reich. At the end of the war, the circle closed. The aircraft that was born under the weight of mockery consecrated itself as an icon of power and a symbol of the Luftwaffe's downfall. The final numbers confirmed what the skies already knew: thousands of missions, thousands of enemy aircraft destroyed, and a decisive role in the Allied victory. But the true legacy of the Thunderbolt is not just in the statistics. It's in the psychological impact it left. For the Allies, it represented progress, protection, and the certainty of air superiority. For the Germans, it became the painful reminder that their arrogance and inability to adapt cost them the war. In post-conflict testimonies, Luftwaffe generals and aces admitted that the mistake was not technical, but philosophical. They judged the machine by what it appeared to be, not by what it was capable of in a new combat paradigm. On the American side, the lesson was equally profound. Cartelli and his pilots proved that air superiority could be achieved not just through agility, but through the combination of power, altitude, and strategy. This concept would echo for decades, influencing the design of future generations of jet fighters, which would never again ignore the importance of dominating the extremes of the atmosphere. The journey of the P-47 Thunderbolt from anomaly to icon serves as the definitive reminder that, in times of conflict, appearance is just a surface. True power is often hidden in the details that few bother to see. Today, the Jug is no longer the laughable target of yesteryear, but the predator that tore through the skies of Europe and redefined the meaning of air power. If you want more stories of underestimated machines that changed the course of history, subscribe now, because the next episode will prove that the impossible always has a second reading.